The pen felt so light in my hand. That's the thing nobody tells you. After 21 years, you expect signing divorce papers to feel like something enormous, like lifting a boulder or pushing through concrete. Instead, it was just a Bic pen on a stack of papers, and my hand moved almost on its own. Signature, initials, date, done. Derek didn't even wait for the notary to finish gathering the documents. I watched him through the glass door of the attorney's office as he stepped into the April sunshine, that first real warmth of the year, the kind that makes the whole subdivision smell like wet soil and possibility, and he pulled out his phone before he'd even reached the parking lot. I knew exactly who he was calling. Everyone knew. His girlfriend, Cassidy, was 26 years old and lived in the apartment complex 3 exits down the highway. He'd been discreet about her for approximately 4 months, which in a place like Birchwood Estates means absolutely nobody was surprised, except apparently me. I sat in that chair for a long time after he left. The notary, a tired-looking woman named Rhonda, who had a coffee stain on her sleeve and the expression of someone who had seen this exact scene play out 600 times before, quietly gathered her stamp and her folder. She didn't say anything. I appreciated that more than I can explain. But let me back up, because the day I signed those papers was not the worst day, not even close. I grew up about 40 minutes outside of Charlotte, in the kind of place where everybody's yard has a riding lawnmower and the HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about the color of your mailbox. My parents were practical, quiet people. My dad worked in logistics. My mom was a bookkeeper. And she's the one who got me interested in numbers. I took after her. Went to UNC, got my accounting degree, came back to North Carolina, and by the time I was 28, I had my CPA license and a job at a mid-sized firm in Concord. That's where I met Derek. He was 30 at the time, I was 28, and he had this easy confidence that I mistook for steadiness. He was a project manager for a commercial construction company, broad-shouldered, always tan from being on job sites, quick with a joke. We dated for 2 years, got married in June, the summer I turned 30, at a small ceremony at his parents' property in Cabarrus County. About 60 guests, my Aunt Lorraine crying through the whole reception, a cake with lemon filling that I still think about sometimes. We bought a house in Birchwood Estates the following spring. It was a good house, 4 bedrooms, a covered back porch, a 2-car garage that Derek immediately filled with tools and equipment I couldn't identify. The neighborhood was one of those planned cottage-style subdivisions, the kind where all the houses have front porches and matching shutters, and the streets curve so you can't see too far ahead. It felt intentional, cozy. I liked that. For a long time, things were good. Genuinely good, not just manageable. Derek worked long hours, and so did I, but we had our routines. Friday night dinners at the Italian place on Main Street in Davidson, weekend projects around the house, trips to see his parents in the fall, mine at Christmas. We didn't have kids. We tried for a few years early on, and it didn't happen, and eventually we both stopped bringing it up, which I think created a quiet space in the center of our marriage that we never quite filled with anything else. But that's hindsight. At the time, I thought we were fine. I was 41 when I first noticed something was off. Actually, no, that's not right either, and I'm trying to be honest here. I noticed things earlier than that. I just didn't trust what I was noticing. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. It started around the time we got a new neighbor upstairs. I need to explain the layout of Birchwood Estates for this to make sense. Most of the houses in our section of the development are standalone, but there's one row of attached townhomes along the back perimeter, narrower lots, shared walls, 2 stories each. Derek and I lived in one of the attached units because it was what we could afford when we bought in, and we always told ourselves we'd upgrade to one of the detached houses eventually. We never did. So when the unit directly above ours, yes, above, it was a stacked configuration, changed hands in the fall 3 years ago, we got a new neighbor. His name was Grant Holloway. He was maybe 45, divorced, worked remotely doing something in tech that he was always vague about. He had a kind of slick friendliness, the type that makes you feel briefly warm before you realize you don't actually know anything about the person. Derek liked him immediately. They started having beers on Grant's upper deck on weekends, talking about the NFL, talking about the neighborhood. I thought nothing of it. Derek needed friends. His work friends were mostly guys he'd known from job sites, who drifted away as projects ended. The noise started about 2 months after Grant moved in. Footsteps, mostly. Heavy, rhythmic, at odd hours. Sometimes it was 3 in the afternoon. Sometimes it was 11 at night, and occasionally, this is what started to make my skin crawl, it was 2 a.m., just a slow, deliberate pacing back and forth directly above our bedroom. I mentioned it to Derek the first time on a Wednesday evening in November. I remember because I was sitting at the kitchen table going through quarterly reports, and I said, "Dio's walking around up there again?" Derek looked up from his phone. "I don't hear anything." "He's pacing. Right above us. He does it all the time." "Babe, the walls in these townhomes carry every sound. You're probably just noticing normal movement." "It's 11:30 on a Wednesday. People stay up late." I let it go. It seemed reasonable. I was under a lot of stress at work. We were in the middle of an audit for one of our larger clients, and I'd been keeping late hours at the office and coming home wired and tense. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I went to bed and lay there listening to the ceiling. It kept happening, every few nights, sometimes more. I started keeping notes on my phone, dates, times, duration, not because I thought I'd need them for anything, just because writing things down is how my brain processes. I'm an accountant. I document. It's reflexive. By January, I'd mentioned it to Derek at least 8 or 9 times. Each time he had a version of the same response. "I don't hear it." "You were probably half asleep." "Grant's a night owl, it's not a big deal." "You're always stressed when tax season comes around. Maybe you should talk to someone." That last one landed differently than the others. It had an edge to it, a suggestion that the problem wasn't the noise. The problem was my perception of the noise. The first time I felt genuinely unsteady was a Saturday in February. I know it was Saturday because I'd been home all day, working from the dining room table, and I'd heard the pacing start around 10 in the morning and go, on and off, for most of the day. When Derek got home from a job site visit at around 4, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, and my nerves were completely shot. "It's been going on all day," I said. He set his keys on the counter and looked at me, not with concern, with something more like careful patience. "What's been going on all day?" "Grant, the pacing. Derek, I've been listening to it since 10 this morning." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Natalie, I talked to Grant this morning. He wasn't even home until noon. He drove to Raleigh to see his daughter." I stared at him. "Then who was up there?" "No one. It's an empty unit when he's not there." "I heard it, Derek. I know you think you did." That phrase, "I know you think you did." I've turned it over in my head so many times since. At the time, it made me feel like the floor had shifted slightly beneath me. I went back to my phone notes that night while Derek watched TV. The dates were all there, the times. I hadn't imagined writing them down. But here's the thing about gaslighting, and I'm using that word now because I understand what was happening, but I didn't have the word for it then. It doesn't work by making you believe something false all at once. It works by making you just uncertain enough, just often enough, that you start to question the reliability of your own senses. I wasn't stupid. I was a CPA with 21 years of marriage and a clear head for numbers, and I still started to wonder if something was wrong with me. By March, I'd made an appointment with my doctor. I told her I was having trouble sleeping, that I was hearing sounds that my husband said weren't there. She checked my blood pressure, asked me about stress levels, suggested I try melatonin and maybe cut back on caffeine after noon. She did not suggest I was losing my mind, but she also couldn't tell me what I was actually hearing. And then April came. The first warm week of April in Birchwood Estates has its own particular quality. The dogwood trees along the perimeter fence bloom all at once, white and pink, and the kids from the other units start appearing in the common area again after a whole winter of nobody being outside. There's a smell. that specific combination of Bradford pear blossoms and fresh mulch that the HOA has put down, that I will never be able to separate from what happened next. I was working from home on a Tuesday, a mild, sunny morning, with the back window cracked open. Derek had left early, or said he had. His truck was gone from the driveway. I was deep in a spreadsheet for a commercial real estate client when I heard it start up again above me. The pacing. Slow, deliberate, back and forth across what I knew was the bedroom directly above ours. I sat very still for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Derek. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." "Where are you right now?" I asked. A brief pause. "I'm at the Mooresville site. Why?" "Are you sure?" Another pause, longer. "Natalie, what's going on?" "I'm hearing it again," I said. "Right now. I'm going to go knock on Grant's door." "Don't do that. You'll embarrass yourself." I hung up. I walked out my front door and up the shared exterior staircase to Grant's unit and knocked. Once. Twice. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the door, feeling absolutely ridiculous, and heard nothing from inside. I went back downstairs, stood in my own living room and listened. And there it was, still, a slow rhythm of footsteps moving above me. I stood there with my heart hammering and thought, either I am losing my mind or something is happening that no one will admit to me. I didn't know yet which one it was, but I was about to find out. I went back inside and sat down at my dining room table. My laptop was still open, the spreadsheet glowing on the screen, columns of numbers that suddenly felt completely meaningless. I sat there with my hands flat on the table and made myself breathe slowly, the way my mom used to tell me to do before a hard test. In through your nose, out through your mouth, count to 4. I did that about 6 times. It didn't help. What I did next was not dramatic. I didn't throw anything or cry. I opened a new note on my phone and typed the time, 10:47 a.m., and wrote, "Footsteps above bedroom. Grant's truck not in lot. Derek insists unit empty." Then I added a question I hadn't let myself ask out loud yet. Is Derek lying to me, or am I actually losing my mind? Seeing it written down made something settle in my chest. Not comfort, exactly. More like clarity about the shape of the problem. Because those were the only 2 options. Either I was experiencing some kind of perceptual break, hearing sounds that weren't there, constructing a pattern from random noise, or my husband had been deliberately, methodically telling me that what I heard with my own ears was not real. There was no third door, and the reason I hadn't let myself look squarely at option 2 was that option 2 meant something about my marriage that I wasn't ready to face. I spent the rest of that Tuesday in a low-grade fog. I answered emails. I finished the spreadsheet. I made pasta for dinner and sat across from Derek and watched him eat and talk about a drainage issue on the Mooresville project. And I thought about how easy it was for him to just sit there, how natural his face looked, how completely untroubled. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He nodded and went back to his phone. That was the night I stopped sleeping properly. Not in a dramatic, sudden way. It was more like my brain just quietly reclassified sleep as optional. I'd lie down, close my eyes, and my thoughts would start moving in tight loops. The dates in my phone notes. The specific phrase, "I know you think you did." The way Derek had picked up on the second ring when I called him from outside Grant's door. No background noise, no sight sounds, no wind, just his voice in a room somewhere quiet. By the end of that first week of April, I had called my friend Vera. Vera Hutchins and I had been friends since our early 30s, when we were both in a women's networking group for finance professionals in the Charlotte area. She was a forensic accountant who did litigation support work, and she had a kind of bone-deep skepticism about stated narratives that I had always admired in a professional context and now needed desperately in a personal one. I told her everything, the noise, the notes, Derek's consistent deflection, the phone call, the empty parking lot. She listened without interrupting. That's one of Vera's gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Has anything else been off? Not just the noise. Anything with Derek?" I started to say no, and then I stopped, because there was something. I'd been filing it under stress, under the general ambient wear of a long marriage, under my own tendency to over-examine. But Vera was asking directly, and Vera didn't ask things without a reason. "His schedule has been inconsistent," I said slowly. "He says he's at job sites, but sometimes when I drive past the Mooresville project, I don't see his truck. He's been very concerned about my mental state, very quick to suggest that I talk to someone, that I'm under too much stress." Another pause from Vera's end of the line. "Natalie," she said, "I want you to do something for me, and I don't want you to tell Derek you're doing it. Okay? I want you to go through your shared accounts, all of them, bank statements, credit cards, everything you have access to. Go back 6 months, and I want you to look for anything that doesn't match what he's told you about where he's been." I felt something cold move through me. "I think you're a CPA who has been talked out of trusting her own documentation," Vera said. "Start with the numbers. The numbers don't gaslight you." I went through the accounts that same night. Derek was downstairs watching something on TV, and I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop and pulled up 3 years of statements, our joint checking, his personal visa that I'd always had read-only access to, the Amex we used for travel. I started with 6 months back, the way Vera said, and I worked forward methodically, the way I would approach any audit. It took me less than 40 minutes to find the first one. A charge on his personal visa from a Tuesday in November, the same Tuesday I'd mentioned the noise at 11:30 at night at a restaurant in Noda, the arts district in Charlotte. $47. I checked the Mooresville site schedule in the project management app he'd added me to years ago, so I could track his hours for tax purposes. He'd been logged as on-site that Tuesday until 6 p.m. Noda was 40 minutes from Mooresville. The charge was time-stamped 8:14 p.m. That wasn't unusual on its own. He could have gone to dinner. But then I found a charge from a week later. A hotel in Cornelius, 38 minutes from our house, on a Wednesday when he'd told me he was driving to a pre-construction meeting in Asheville that would run late. Too late to drive back. He'd just stay over. The hotel charge was $129. I pulled up his texts from that day on the family location app we'd both downloaded 3 years ago when I'd had a minor fender bender and we'd decided it was practical to share locations. His phone had pinged in Cornelius at 10 p.m., not Asheville. I sat with that for a long time. Then I kept going. By midnight, I had 11 entries that didn't align. Not all of them were damning on their own. A few could be explained. But together, across 6 months, they formed a pattern as clear to me as any financial discrepancy I'd ever flagged for a client. Dates, locations, times. A story my husband had been telling me that did not match the receipts. The noise above the bedroom started around 12:30. I sat there and listened to it and didn't move, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid of it or uncertain about whether it was real. I felt something much quieter and much colder. I felt like a person who has just run the final column of a very complicated audit and found that the numbers tell a completely different story than the one in the report. I called Vera back the next morning at 7, before Derek was up. "You were right," I said. "How bad?" 6 months of inconsistencies, hotel stays that don't match where he said he was, dinners, and there's something with our upstairs neighbor, I don't know what yet, but Derek knows him better than he's let on. Vera was quiet for a moment. "Do you have a divorce attorney?" The question landed like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was the first time anyone had said out loud the thing I'd been circling for months. "No," I said. "I'm going to text you a name. Her name is Patricia Wohl. She's in Concord, she's very good, and she does a free initial consultation. Call her today. Before you do anything else, before you confront Derek, before you change anything in those accounts, before you move a single dollar, call her first." I wrote the name on the back of an envelope because my hands were shaking too hard to type it. Patricia Wohl's office called me back within 2 hours of my voicemail. Her assistant, a calm and efficient woman named Deborah, scheduled me for a Thursday afternoon slot, 48 hours away. I spent those 48 hours doing 2 things. I kept acting completely normal around Derek, which was the hardest performance of my life, and I kept going through documents. I found the Cassidy connection on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after I'd started digging. Her name was on a Venmo transaction. Derek had sent money, $200, to a Cassidy Arnett in December, then again in January, then 2 more times in February. The memos on the first 3 said things like utilities and groceries, the kind of mundane labels you'd put on a transfer if you didn't want it to look like what it was. The 4th one in February had no memo at all. I looked her up. It wasn't hard. Her Instagram was public, and she was 26 years old, and she worked at a fitness studio 3 exits down the highway from Birchwood Estates. I sat with my coffee going cold in my hand and looked at her profile for a long time. She had no idea I existed. I was certain of that. She was posting workout videos and pictures with her friends, and a sunset she'd photographed from what looked like a balcony apartment. She had no idea that the man she was seeing had spent months convincing his wife of 21 years that she was hearing things. I closed the app and went back to my spreadsheet. Thursday came. Patricia Wool's office was in a professional building off Cabarrus Avenue, 2nd floor, the kind of quiet suite with upholstered chairs and a water cooler, and no artwork that might accidentally express a point of view. Patricia herself was a compact woman in her late 50s, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She shook my hand and looked at me with the specific, focused attention of someone who has heard a great many stories and is prepared to hear one more. I laid it all out. The noise, the gaslighting, the financial records, Cassidy Arnett, the hotel in Cornelius, the Venmo transfers. I put printed copies of the statements on her desk in chronological order, the way I'd present a client file. Patricia looked through them without saying much. Then she set the papers down and folded her hands on top of them. "You've done excellent preliminary work," she said. "This is organized and documented, and it's going to be useful. Now I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing you're going to hear for a while." I nodded. "Do not move money. Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior in any way that would alert him that you know." She held my gaze. "You have a significant asset in this marriage: the house, your retirement accounts, his 401k contributions, and right now you are in the strongest possible position because he doesn't know that you know. The moment he finds out, that changes. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "Good. I'm going to need you to get me 3 years of tax returns, your mortgage statement, and a list of all joint accounts. Can you have that to me by Monday?" "I can have it to you tomorrow," I said. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not because anything had gotten better. Everything was actually considerably worse than I'd thought it was 6 months ago. But because I had stopped asking, "Am I imagining this?" and started asking, "What do I do about this?" Those are completely different questions, and only one of them has a useful answer. I drove home from Patricia's office in the late afternoon light, the April sky going gold and pink over the subdivision rooftops, and I pulled into the driveway and sat in my car for a moment before going inside. Derek's truck was there. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the TV. I thought about Vera saying, "The numbers don't gaslight you." I thought about Patricia saying, "You're in the strongest possible position because he doesn't know that you know." I thought about 21 years. Then I picked up my bag, went inside, and made dinner. I set 2 plates on the table. I asked Derek about his day. I listened to him talk about the drainage issue in Mooresville. I laughed at something he said. I did all of it with my whole chest hollowed out and my mind already 3 steps ahead, running columns, checking figures, building the case the way I'd been trained to build a case since I was 22 years old sitting in an accounting classroom in Chapel Hill. The noise started up again at 11 that night. I lay in the dark and listened to it move back and forth above me, and this time I wasn't afraid of it, and I wasn't confused by it. I was simply noting it, adding it to the file, because I understood now that every single thing in this house, every sound, every silence, every careful, ordinary evening, was evidence, and I had always been very, very good at evidence. What I didn't know yet was that Grant Holloway was not just Derek's beer and football friend, and when I found out what he actually was, it reordered everything I had thought I understood about my marriage. It reordered everything I thought I understood about the last 3 years of my life. Grant Holloway wasn't Derek's buddy from the neighborhood. He was Derek's cousin. Second cousin, technically. Their mothers were first cousins, which in the Cabarrus County extended family tree put them close enough to have grown up at the same holiday tables. I found this out not from Derek, not from Vera, but from Patricia's paralegal, a thorough young woman named Simone, who had run a basic background search as part of the asset discovery process. She called me on a Monday morning and said, "Mrs. Alderman, I want to flag something about the upstairs neighbor." I sat down at my kitchen table with my coffee. "Go ahead." "Grant Holloway. His mother's maiden name is Alderman, same as your husband's family." The silence on my end must have been eloquent, because Simone said quietly, "I thought you might not have known that." "I didn't," I said. "No, Derek told me he barely knew him. Said they'd met maybe twice before he moved in." "The HOA application for that unit lists Derek Alderman as an emergency contact," Simone said, "submitted the same week Mr. Holloway applied to rent." I set my coffee mug down very carefully on the table. My hand was steady. That surprised me. "So Derek helped him get the unit," I said. "It appears so." I stayed on the phone with Simone for another 20 minutes, asking questions, and by the end of it I had a picture that was both clearer and considerably uglier than anything I'd imagined. Grant hadn't moved in by coincidence. Derek had arranged it. The pacing above my bedroom, the slow, deliberate rhythm that had been driving me to my doctor, that had made me question whether my own mind was reliable, was Grant, walking the floor at Derek's request, or at least with Derek's knowledge. At times they coordinated. I couldn't prove the coordination directly, not yet, but I had Derek's phone records going back 4 months. Patricia had requested them through the discovery process, and there were text exchanges with Grant on the same nights the pacing had started and stopped. Short messages, nothing explicit, just timestamps that lined up with uncanny precision. They had used Grant to make me feel like I was losing my mind, so that when Derek eventually asked for a divorce, I would be too destabilized to fight properly, too uncertain of myself, too worn down. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I got off the phone with Simone. The dogwood trees outside were in full bloom, white and reckless, and I thought about how calculated it all was. Not a crime of passion, not a man who had simply fallen for someone else and made a mess of his exit. This was engineered. This was patient. This was a man who had looked at his wife of 21 years and decided that the cleanest way to be rid of her was to first make her doubt her own sanity. Patricia filed for divorce on my behalf the following week. Derek was served at his office, which was my one small act of deliberate choice in the matter. I could have had it done at the house, but I wanted him to open that envelope in front of his colleagues. Patricia didn't advise it either way. I told her that was where I wanted it done, and she made a note. He called me 20 minutes after the process server left his building. I was at my own office, at my desk, and I watched his name light up my phone and let it ring 4 times before I picked up. "What is this?" he said. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, tight, stripped of its usual easy confidence. "You've been served divorce papers," I said. "Your attorney will explain the rest." "Natalie, I'm going to need you to direct any further communication to Patricia Wool's office. You have her number. Have a good afternoon, Derek." I hung up. Then I put my phone face down on my desk, pressed my palms flat on either side of it, and breathed through my nose for about 30 seconds. My hands were still steady. I noted that with something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it. The divorce process took 8 months from filing to final decree, which Patricia had warned me it would. During those 8 months, Derek did exactly what she had predicted he would do the moment he understood the extent of what I'd documented. He hired an attorney named Burgess, who had a reputation for aggressive negotiation, and they came in hard on the house, on my retirement accounts, on the valuation of his 401k. Burgess argued that the marriage had simply run its course, that Derek's relationship with Cassidy had begun after the marriage had already effectively ended, that there was no actionable misconduct. Patricia let them make their arguments. Then she put the phone records on the table. The HOA application with Derek's name as Grant's emergency contact, the Venmo transfers, the hotel receipts cross-referenced with the false Asheville alibi, the timeline of my documented noise complaints mapped against the texts between Derek and Grant. My client, Patricia said, in the one joint session I attended in person, has spent 18 months being systematically misled about the state of her marriage, about the fidelity of her husband, and about the reliability of her own perceptions. We are prepared to present that documentation in detail. Burgess looked at Derek. Derek looked at the table. We settled 3 weeks later. I kept the house. Derek's 401k was split at 58% in my favor, accounting for the years I had deferred my own retirement contributions to cover household costs during 2 periods when his construction company had contract gaps. I received a cash settlement from the joint accounts that covered my legal fees, and then some. Derek moved out on a Saturday in October, and I watched his truck pull out of the driveway from the window of the upstairs bathroom, which was the only room in the house where I let myself cry that day. He moved in with Cassidy, into her apartment 3 exits down the highway. I knew this because Vera told me, and Vera knew because she had a friend who used the same fitness studio where Cassidy worked. I didn't ask for details beyond that. I didn't need them. That chapter had been closed and notarized. The final papers came through on a cold Tuesday in December, and I signed them in Patricia's office. Same upholstered chairs, same water cooler, same quiet. Rhonda, the notary, was not there this time. It was a different notary, a younger man who stamped everything efficiently and left without ceremony. Patricia shook my hand when it was done and said, "You handled this exceptionally well." I thanked her and meant it. Then came the part of the story that I genuinely did not see coming. Vera called me on a Thursday afternoon in late January, about 6 weeks after the divorce was final. I was home, making soup, the kind of slow winter afternoon that feels almost peaceful when you've gotten used to quiet. "Have you talked to anyone from Derek's family recently?" she asked. "No," I said. "His sister sent a card at Christmas, which I thought was kind. That's it." "Okay." A pause. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to sit with it before you decide how to feel about it." "That's a preamble," I said. "It is. Derek had a medical appointment last week. His regular doctor, checkup, nothing unusual. Except apparently it wasn't routine. He's been having symptoms for a few months, fatigue, some other things, and they ran a full panel." I stopped stirring the soup. "Vera." "He has a heart condition," she said. "Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He's known about it for about 3 months, apparently. He'd been seeing a cardiologist since October, right around when the divorce finalized." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing in my kitchen with a wooden spoon in my hand, looking out the window at the bare branches of the Bradford pear tree in the backyard. "How did you find out?" I asked. "His sister called me. She knows we're friends. She wanted to know if you knew because apparently Derek told his cardiologist that his ex-wife was his emergency contact. The cardiologist's office called the number on file, and it went to your old joint cell plan number, which Derek apparently never updated. The call got forwarded to your number by accident." "I never got a call," I said. "You didn't pick up. It went to voicemail. Did you check?" I crossed to the counter, put the spoon down, and opened my voicemail with slightly numb fingers. There it was, a message from a Charlotte medical practice, left 11 days ago, asking me to call regarding a patient. I had ignored it because I didn't recognize the number and assumed it was spam. I called the number back that afternoon. The woman who answered was a medical coordinator, professional and careful, who confirmed that there had been an administrative error. Derek had listed me as his emergency contact prior to the divorce finalizing, and the contact information had not been updated in their system. She was apologetic and efficient. She said she would correct the records. "From this point forward," she said, "your former husband's care is no longer connected to your file in any way. As his ex-wife, you have no role in his treatment or his medical decisions." I told her I understood. I thanked her and hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The soup was still simmering. The Bradford pear outside had a single brown leaf hanging from one branch, trembling in a draft I couldn't feel from inside. I thought about Derek. I thought about what it meant to have a heart condition, a structural one, the kind that doesn't announce itself until suddenly it does. I thought about all the years I would have been the person who drove him to appointments, who sat in waiting rooms, who held the information and made the calls. I was not that person anymore. His doctor had made that very clear. I will not pretend that I felt nothing. I did feel something complicated and layered that I couldn't have named precisely if I tried. Grief, maybe, for a version of him that had existed before I knew what he was capable of. Something that might have been pity, something that was definitely not regret, not about the divorce, not about any of it. Just the particular sadness of understanding that a person you once loved is now somewhere you cannot reach, and that this is the right and necessary outcome, and that it still costs something to know it. I called his sister, Renee, that evening. We'd always gotten along, Renee and I. She was a practical, warm woman who lived in Concord and had 3 kids, and had always seemed faintly embarrassed by her brother's more careless qualities. I told her I'd gotten the voicemail, that I'd spoken to the medical coordinator, that Derek needed to update his emergency contacts. "I know," Renee said. She sounded tired. I told him. He said he'd take care of it. "Make sure Cassidy has all the information she needs," I said. "That's his life now. She should be the one he calls." There was a pause on Renee's end. "Are you okay, Natalie?" "Yes," I said. "I actually am." And the thing was, I meant it. Not in the way you mean it when you're performing fine for someone else's benefit. I meant it the way you mean something when it's simply true. I was standing in my own house, in the kitchen I had kept in the settlement, with soup on the stove and Patricia Wool's final invoice marked paid in my files, and a new January stretching out in front of me that belonged entirely to me. Spring came again to Birchwood Estates the way it always did. The dogwoods and the Bradford pears and the HOA's fresh mulch along the perimeter fence. Grant Holloway had moved out in November, shortly after the divorce was filed. His unit had been re-rented by February to a woman named Dolores, who worked nights and was almost completely silent. The ceiling above my bedroom was quiet. I slept better than I had in years. Vera took me to dinner in March to celebrate. Proper celebration. A restaurant in Plaza Midwood that required a reservation 6 weeks out, the kind of place with small plates and very good wine. We sat at a corner table and she raised her glass and said, "To the numbers not lying." I raised mine. "To the numbers not lying." I went back to work. I took on 2 new clients and negotiated a senior partnership track at the firm, something I'd been putting off for 2 years because Derek had always had a subtle way of making me feel that ambition was slightly unseemly in a wife. I started running in the mornings, not because I'd had some transformative epiphany about self-care, but because I needed something to do with the energy that had previously gone into being afraid of my own perceptions. I did not start dating, not for a long time. That wasn't the point. The point was this. I had spent 18 months being told that what I heard with my own ears was not real.